I have a bunch of monitors that I've been testing in the studio for a couple of weeks now, and if you have a Mac device and you are wondering which resolution is best for you that will work and give you the best user experience on the Mac, well, you found the right video. My monitors are the same screen size, so they are all 27 inches, and the only thing that's different is the resolution. So in this video, I'm simply going to be comparing a 4K and 1440p monitor. I did do a very in-depth video comparing 4K, 1440p, and even 1080p. If you want to see that, I'll leave it on top here and in the description of this video. For now, we're just focusing on 4K and 1440p 27-inch external monitors. Before you go out and buy a new external monitor, you definitely need to know how macOS deals with resolution. To be specific, macOS uses 2x scaling for high resolution monitors such as 4K, 5K, 6K, and in some cases even 8K monitors. To show you an example of what I mean right here, you can see this is on my 4K LG monitor. So you can see by default for a 27-inch 4K monitor, the default scaling that macOS sets the user interface to is 1920 by 1080p. So it makes my LG ultrafine 4K monitor. You can see here the monitor has the ability to go all the way to 4K, but because of the 2x scaling that I mentioned, you can see it's setting it to 1080p. And at the same time, if you go and click on your Apple logo and hold the option key, you can go to the system information, then go to where it says graphics and display, and you can see right here we can refresh our page by pressing Command and R, and you can see for my LG ultrafine the resolution of the panel, so the panel native resolution is 3840 by 2160, which is 4K, but then you can see the UI looks like 1920 by 1080p at 60 Hz. If you have a 5K monitor, then because of the 2x scaling that macOS uses for high resolution monitors, by default the UI is going to be set at 2560 by 1440p. From this simple example, we can now make out what macOS scaling is, and put simply, macOS scaling is a feature that adjusts the size of text, icons, and other elements on the screen to make them appear or smaller depending on the display's resolution and user preference, since this is something that we can adjust according to our need, and it helps ensure that everything looks sharp and is readable, especially on high resolution monitors like 4K, 5K, 6K, or even 8K monitors. One of the most important things that macOS takes into account, like I mentioned, is resolution, and because our monitors are the same size, the resolution is different, meaning that the pixels per inch that the monitors have are also different. There's actually a whole calculation that you can use to be able to calculate how many pixels per inch. If you have a 27-inch 4K monitor, it will give you this many pixels per inch, and that's the same average that I have on my 27-inch 4K monitor. If you have a 27-inch 1440p external monitor, then you can also come up with the total number of pixels per inch. Keep in mind that in most cases, under the spec sheet of an external monitor that you're trying to buy, the manufacturer will sometimes put how many pixels per inch the monitor has, and instead of doing the calculation, you can actually be able to just see the figure right there. I would like to highlight this important information, especially when it comes to non-retina displays. So this chart that you are seeing right here shows different screen sizes, 20 inch to 24, 25 to 29, and so on, and different resolutions for those associated monitors. And you can see this is against different pixels per inch that the monitor has. So you can see here, for example, for non-retina PPIs, you can see here, for example, if you have this 34-inch 1440p display, it has a PPI of 109 pixels per inch, and you can see for a non-retina display that is in good range. A 27-inch 1440p monitor, which I have right here, you can see it has an average PPI of about 109 pixels per inch, and that is good for non-retina displays. You can see right there. So from this chart right here, we can see that for 1440p monitors and along with those with lower resolutions, they generally do not have high enough pixels to be considered retina displays. So these displays usually have a PPI of about 100 to 110 pixels per inch, which is within the typical range of non-retina displays. For these monitors, macOS assumes that the pixel density is low enough that the display does not require scaling, as the UI elements should already appear at a readable and consistent size when sitting comfortably on a desk. This can be illustrated, for example, right here. If I select my 27-inch 1440p monitor, you can see by default macOS is not scaling the UI, and at the same time, if we refresh this page, you can see this is my 27-inch 1440p panel. It's the maximum resolution that this panel can go to, and because this is a non-retina and macOS assumes that the pixel density is low enough that it does not need scaling and it's not too small, it's readable. So right here you can see for a 27-inch 1440p monitor, macOS is going to set it to 2560 by 1440p, and at the same time the monitor or the panel resolution 2160 by 1440p, and macOS UI is going to look like 2560 by 1440p at 180 hertz. This is the refresh rate of this monitor, and at the same time you can see if we go here, because this is the default scaling, we don't have any message or any error that's saying, hey, using a scaled resolution will lead to performance effects, because this is the default scaling or the default setting that macOS sets a 27-inch 1440p at. It runs natively at 1440p. Now I've selected my 4K monitor right here, and I want to show you the difference with the 4K monitor. So you can see for a 27-inch 1440p 4K monitor, like I showed before, the UI is scaled to 1080p, and by that you can see how macOS sets the UI. It doesn't have the message that says this will affect performance, and at the same time you can see macOS knows that this is a 4K panel and it's gonna make the UI look like 1080p. But if you were to set a 4K monitor to run at 3840 by 2160, which is natively 4K, if you set it at that, you can see how the UI looks, and at the same time if we refresh this page, you'll see our resolution is 4K and the UI looks like 4K, and at the same time you can see we have the message that says using a scaled resolution may affect performance, because we are using it not in the default resolution that macOS sets. So without scaling, the user elements would appear very small on the screen, as they would be rendered 1:1 pixel ratio. So to prevent this and to make sure that the UI elements are more readable on a 27-inch 4K monitor, macOS scales the display to effectively simulate a lower resolution, in this case by default 1440p, and that message disappears. And if we refresh this page, you can see we are back to 1080p. So macOS scales the display to effectively look like that of a lower resolution monitor, while taking advantage of this display's high resolution for crispness, sharp text and images. This is why 27-inch 4K monitor scaled by default for macOS to 1080p will look much sharper compared to a 27-inch 1080p monitor. So a 27-inch 4K display has much more pixels and the resolution is much higher than a 1080p, and that's why it will always look sharper than a 27-inch 1080p. To help you understand how macOS is going to handle different resolutions at 27 inches, I'm going to put a graph here on the screen to help you see how it handles this. And take note that once the resolution goes to 4K and beyond, then macOS is going to use that 2x scaling. So for example, on a 27-inch 1080p panel that has a native resolution of 1920 by 1080p, macOS is going to make the UI look like 1920 by 1080p. So there is essentially no scaling, and using the default set resolution on this 27-inch 1080p monitor, you won't get the message that says that this will affect performance. On a 2K, also known as 1440p monitor that has a native panel resolution of 2560 by 1440, the UI is going to be scaled to look like 2560 by 1440. So essentially, there is no scaling again. The panel is just running at its native resolution. On a 4K monitor that has a native panel resolution of 3840 by 2160, like I showed, the UI is going to be scaled to look like 1080p, which is 1920 by 1080p. On a 5K display, for example, like the Apple Studio display, it has a native panel resolution of 5120 by 2880, and the UI is going to be scaled to look like 1440p, because if it was scaled to 5K natively, you would need a magnifying glass to see. And just to go a little bit further, a 6K display, just like the premium Apple Pro Display XDR, has a native panel resolution of 6061 by 3384, and the UI is going to be scaled to 3008 by 6191p. Because we're just comparing 27-inch 4K and 27-inch 1440p, we've seen that 4K 27-inch is scaled. macOS uses the 2x scaling, but on a 27-inch 1440p, it's not scaled. So the first thing you need to do on a 27-inch 4K monitor is to choose the resolution that works best for you. Now, the first option that you have right here for a 27-inch 4K monitor is to run the display natively at the scaled resolution that macOS sets, which is 1080p. And at this setting, you can see that the text looks really sharp. It's really crisp, and the different user elements as well as the menu bar and dock, they are really sharp and in focus. But the disadvantage to this is the screen real estate, because 1080p looks much bigger than 1440p. And also another advantage of running it at its default set resolution is that you won't get the message that says this will affect performance. But if you want more screen real estate, you might want to run your monitor at a higher resolution, which is not 1080p, for example 1440p, and you can see how much screen real estate that we've gained. So this is how 1440p looks, and then if we go back to 1080p, this is how 1080p looks. Again, going back to 1440p, this is how it looks, and going back to 1080p right here, you can see how it looks, and back and forth you can see how much it crops in when you go to 1080p. And then when you go to 1440p on a 4K display, this is how it looks. You can see it right there. On 1440p you have more screen real estate, because 1440p on a 27-inch 4K monitor is scaled and 1080p is not. When you select 1440p unlike 1080p, you are going to get this message that says using a scaled resolution may affect performance. And in fact, you can see what this message means right here, because on our 4K monitor right here, you can see our LG macOS, in order to implement the 2x scaling, it doesn't think the native panel resolution is 4K. In fact, it thinks it's 5K, which is 2120 by 2880, and it's making the UI look like 1440p, thereby implementing the 2x scaling. And that's why we are getting this message that says using a scaled resolution may affect performance, because we've selected 2560 by 1440. A pretty cool thing I thought I should share is when you are using different monitors scaled to different resolutions, so 1440p at 1440p, 4K at 1080p, and my MacBook at this default set resolution. If you try and arrange your windows, you can see how my 4K monitor looks, and this is how my 1440p looks, and this is how my Mac's display looks. But if you were to go into your settings right here, go to the 4K monitor and set it to 1440p, and then try and arrange, all the windows are now the same size for my external displays. I want to clarify something, as a lot of users seem to get hung up on this message, using a scaled resolution might affect performance. So my display right here is 4K 60 Hz. So a lot of people think that if you have a 60 Hz display, the system is going to use the GPU to redraw the entire screen 60 frames per second. But that's not the case, because once your system has rendered or redrawn the white component of the particular window it doesn't need to redraw it again unless the window size or components continuously change and are resized. If the system did redraw everything 60 frames per second every time you did something, then your system would literally be unusable. So this is just a message to tell you or let you know that you're using a scaled resolution. And from my experience and from what I've seen using different monitors as I've been testing this, if you have an Apple Silicon M1, I'm actually using the Apple M1 Pro 14-inch MacBook Pro. This literally has no impact on GPU as well as CPU, and I confirmed this by running Geekbench 5 scores and doing different exports on videos, and I literally didn't see any effect using 4K scale to 1440p as compared to using 1440p at 1440p. But there is an advantage of running 4K at 1440p compared to running 1440p at 1440p on my 27-inch monitors. Let me show you what I mean by this. This is how 4K on a 1440p panel looks. Look at the text, look at the different user elements, look at the dock, look at this menu bar as well, and all the different systems. This is how 4K looks on 1440p, and I'm just simply going to take the same window and make it pop up on my 1440p monitor set at 1440p so that you can see the difference in sharpness. Now this is the same window on my 1440p monitor running natively at 1440p, and you can see it right here. So this is the monitor that you are viewing right here running natively at 1440p, and the UI looking at 1440p. You can see there is a very big difference on how clear the image looks and how the different menu bar as well as our different dock, the sharpness is very different compared to that of a 4K monitor running at 1440p. And this is actually very easy to explain, because even though the UI is set or looks the same, the resolution in pixels per inch that each monitor has is different. So a 4K monitor has about 8.3 million pixels, while a 1440p monitor has about 3.6 million pixels. So the amount of pixels that a 4K monitor has are more than double that of 1440p, and that is why when you take a 4K monitor and make the UI look like 1440p, it looks much sharper and visually it's more pleasing. If you try and zoom in close to the monitor to do pixel peeping, you won't be able to see much as compared to 1440p running at 1440p, where the text in this case is not as sharp, and it's because the pixels in a 4K monitor are much more, and at the same time the resolution is much more in a 4K monitor. So 4K will always look much sharper than 1440p, even if you use different applications like Better Display to try and set 1440p text and makes it look sharper. It's still limited because it doesn't have enough resolution or pixels to match that of 1440p at 4K. In conclusion, 4K is almost best in most case scenarios. It's the best if you're going to be consuming content like watching this video. It's also going to be really good if you're going to be creating content like using your monitor as an external display for editing different videos and viewing different elements on the screen. It's going to look sharp. It's also very good if you are like a programmer or if you are a student. 4K is going to look much better than 1440p. The only time I would recommend you go for a 1440p over a 4K monitor is if you're using a non-Apple Silicon Mac or a really old Mac device that's going to be affected by using a scaled resolution, which in that case would definitely affect performance. And also the other time I'm going to recommend a 1440p monitor over a 4K monitor is if you are doing gaming or if you are looking for a high refresh rate or high FPS monitor that's affordable, because it's very easy to get an affordable, cheap, high refresh rate monitor like 1440p, 180 hertz, 250, or even in some cases 400 hertz at 1440p, it's doable. But on 4K, it's not yet there. In fact, most external monitors at 4K are at 60 hertz, and then if you are going above like 120 hertz or even higher, like 144 on 4K, it tends to be more expensive. So that's just my quick 2 cents and a bit of research here. If you want to see 4K at 27 inch versus 1440p 27 inch versus 1080p 27 inch, I did a whole video that I left in the description of this video that you can check out, and I explained the macOS 2x scaling in more detail. So check it out and let me know what you think, and hope you like this video. If you found it helpful in a way, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.